After Zoomies at the dog park, it's time for Drive Up at Target. In goes a big bag of kibble and one squeaky chicken toy for the good boy. Drive Up that's ready when you are, only in the Target app. Just tap Target.
Losing muscle after 60 is not normal. It's dangerous. My guest today says strength should be treated like a vital sign right along with blood pressure and heart rate. Here's why. Hi everyone, I'm Barbara, and this is Age Better. We're kicking off today's episode with a fascinating new study out of Stanford that found aging doesn't happen in a straight line. It jumps. And one of the biggest leaps, well, happens right around age 60. That's when strength, metabolism, energy, and resilience can start to decline dramatically. But my guest today says it doesn't have to be that way. Dr. Rozanski is a nationally recognized expert in preventive cardiology, a professor of medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City, and founder of one of the leading cardiac rehabilitation programs in the country. And he believes we need to rethink how we approach aging, starting by making strength a vital sign, right alongside like blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, and so on, all those checks that you get when you go to your doctor's office. In other words, your muscle health should be measured and monitored just like your other critical indicators. In this episode, we talk about why resistance training is still missing from most public health guidelines, how it can protect you from falls, frailty, and fatigue, and why strength is non-negotiable if you want to stay independent as you get older. But listen, we go way beyond muscle in this conversation. Dr. Rozanski walks us through his powerful framework called the 6 domains of optimal health and vitality, covering physical health, mental vitality, emotional mastery, purposeful living, stress management, and social connection. It's a full body, full life strategy for aging stronger. It's a true masterclass. So, okay, everyone, get ready to age better. Welcome to Age Better, Dr. Rozanski. I'm so happy to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And this is very timely because I just saw some new research that came out from the CDC this week talking about, and I'm going to look at my notes here, how older U.S. adults are increasingly dying from falls. According to the CDC, in the last 20 years, death rates from falls increased by more than 70% for people 65 to 74. That's alarming. And the rate increased more than 75% for people 75 to 84 and more than doubled for seniors 85 and older. This is alarming, and we need to do something about this. So, Dr. Rozanski, I'd love to start first this conversation with some other research that came out of Stanford University. And I think it's a good research to kind of kick off this conversation. It made headlines. Scientists found that aging seems to kind of jump. We don't just kind of like hum along, right? We jump at 44 and then again at 60. With dramatic changes in biology, metabolism, and very important to our conversation today, strength. So what do you make of this research and how does it kind of inform your own clinical work?
Sure. Well, it was an exceedingly interesting study. And of course, the whole topic of aging is increasingly studied. We have better techniques to do it, which was employed in this particular study with this complex metabolic profiling. And they looked at people across age groups. They followed them, looking at about over thousands of molecules in each person, even looked at the microbiomes and followed them for a few years, and then looked at age and then looked at factors that might correlate with heart disease, cholesterol metabolism, and inflammation. And it did suggest that aging, according to their analysis, was nonlinear. And they noted that seemed to be a jump in aging effects in people in the mid-40s and in the early 60s. Having said that, the attention to this reminds me of all of the experience we've had now for decades with nutrition literature. Are eggs healthy, eggs unhealthy? And every new study is popularized. So I think we have to be careful. This was a study that only involved 108 individuals, and they were looking at correlations, but they weren't looking at the drivers of what these factors may have been. So they don't know if certain individuals were under stress or were having emotional problems and things like that that could have been drivers in a small sample. So you have to be careful. So the research is elegant and important. But if I wanted to frame this, I would say that we do have a lot of data that has characterized what happens with aging. And we know that everybody ages, and there's what we call primary aging. For example, we're losing muscle mass 3 to 8% every decade, and then we're losing bone density 1 to 3% per year, and basal metabolic rate also declines by 2 to 3% every decade. But we know that there's something called secondary aging. So that, in other words, that although these are predictable effects in people, you can alter that rate of decline. For example, if you're paying attention to lifestyle factors such as exercise, if you're doing resistance training, getting proper sleep, how you manage stress. So there's good news because we're all going to age, but you can decrease the age of aging if you're doing the right things. And the opposite can occur if you're promoting secondary aging by doing the bad things.
Yeah, that is positive because I've always said that if you take some action, and these are not so complicated and some of them are quite simple to do. Let's maybe just making a few changes here and there with how you exercise or if you exercise and so on. And it really can make a difference in how we age. We know this to be true. There's too much science now. So you've said that we're missing the mark by focusing only on aging gracefully. By the way, a term I never personally use, when we should be talking about aging strong. That is a term I like to use. Now there you go, Dr. Rozanski. Yes, when we should be talking about that, why is strength such a vital yet often ignored component of aging better and aging well, especially for midlife women, which is my audience? Why?
Well, it's a very good question. We paid a lot of attention, for example, in recent years and decades, even to the obesity epidemic and our concerns about weight. And there's a clarity that these are important things to intervene in. And we see this as an epidemic. I don't think that people have seen that the fact is that as you get older, your strength is going to be a big determinant of your outcomes. That's one of the problems with this. The other thing is that this is what I would call like a treatment gap. In other words, if you think about the people who might be concerned about this, whether they be orthopedists or physiatrists, which take care of muscles and bones, but they don't operate, or cardiologists or geriatricists, they're all focused on how do I help cure people of the problems, okay? So, and there's so much to do. So if you're going to the orthopedic doctor and you're having problems with your shoulder, he's going to pay attention to treating your shoulder, but he might use that opportunity to talk about overall strength training. And I think that you should, but it doesn't happen as much as it should happen.
Right. But I do like that your focus is more on, hey, everyone, let's age strong. Let that be your mantra as opposed to aging more gracefully. So I like that, and I thank you for that. So why do you think resistance training is still not front and center in most doctors' guidelines and recommendations? Like you just mentioned, a great example, I hurt my shoulder, the doctor will fix my shoulder, but doesn't look at me holistically. And so how do we change this?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, this has been part of my mission now for a number of years. I'm a cardiologist, and I've been involved in non-invasive cardiology and with stress testing of patients using special imaging techniques where we can detect sensitively whether people have blockages of the coronary arteries. So the patients come in and we put them on a treadmill and we have them exercise. Well, years ago, we developed a pharmacological means for evaluating patients who couldn't exercise. That was an alternative. So if you look over time, you see that when we look at people's outcomes in terms of what's going to predict heart disease and decreased longevity, it turns out among all those risk factors you measure, blood pressure, cholesterol, and all these, and chest pain even, the strongest predictor among clinical variables of whether people are going to live or not is, could they get on a treadmill or not? So the mere inability to get on that treadmill increased people's risk of cardiac events and all-cause mortality over the follow-up periods of like 10 years by about 2 to 3-fold, which is a marked increase in outcome. So I have written about this, and I've argued that we should promote reporting this to doctors. And you can look at a train of my papers over time, and we don't really incorporate that into our clinical reports the way we
No,
should.
we don't. And I have looked at quite a few of your papers in preparation for meeting with you today and having this discussion. And I see that you're right. And in fact, you say and you write that strength should be part of vital signs like measuring your blood pressure, your heart rate,
Right.
and everything else that is measured when you go for an annual physical or a specific visit. Yes. So how do we get that to become part of the operation of the medical system? How do we do that?
Well, there's a number of things to say about this, So there's plain vital signs, heart rate, blood pressure, that's always measured. I would argue, and I've written a paper on this, the concept of lifestyle vital signs, to ask people, are you exercising or not? Are you doing strength training or not? Even a question or two about sleep and just a few questions about diet. And I think you can get at a lot just from that information. Now, we have had in our database, I've worked with a group of investigators from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center for many years, and we've had a question on an exercise vital sign. One question: to what extent do you exercise on a 0 to 10 scale? It's a short question, 0 being none and 10 being a lot. Well, guess what? We followed people over time, and this single question was highly predictive of people's outcomes. And when we combine this with, let's say, their calcium score, which measures the amount of atherosclerosis, or other measures that we do with stress testing, it provided synergistic information. So we can get at this kind of information, I think, with simple questions with patients. Now, I wouldn't be so pessimistic that we're not getting somewhere, because in 1964, the Surgeon General had his famous report on smoking, that it was a hazard to health, and that was widely publicized. It took nearly 30 years to make asking the question about smoking part of the vital sign questions that doctors ask when patients come in for their clinical visits. So I looked at that and said, wow, that took 30 years. I think we could do better than that now. And I think we
Wow.
are. I think we are. But it does take time.
It does take time. You know what? There's another aspect of our health that I think should be part of the vital signs, and that's is measuring our waistline and to see what does our waist look like. And
Sure.
not so much the BMI, but
Sure.
I mean, that doesn't take long. You can
It
just
doesn't
have a
take
tape
long.
measure and just measure the waist, and then you can say, hey, you know what? Your waist is a little bit bigger than it should be, blah, blah, blah. Here's what you should do. And I really feel very strongly about that one too. I'm curious about trying to measure strength as a vital sign in a doctor's office environment. Is it possible, and how do you feel about maybe even having a grip strength? Of course, I'm having a mind blank on what that called. That actually is a dynamometer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I happen to own one. I do measure myself. How do you feel about that?
Well, the data is profound. There is a ton of data, meta-analyses, which have shown that the simple measure is highly predictive of clinical outcomes. And it is a general reflection indirectly of overall muscle strength. So I think that's one thing we can measure. I talk about 4 things. I've said that you could do these 4 things in 2 to 3 minutes if we really wanted to be smart about this. And I'm optimistic at some point we'll get there. One is just to look at how people are walking, just observe them. But we have something called the 4-meter walking speed test. 4 meters is about 13 feet. And you can measure people's walking speed. And it can slow with age. And if it slows substantially, this is a big predictor of clinical risk and would be a tip-off. Well, you maybe want to get more active and do things to improve your health. So that's one thing we can do. The hand grip strength is a second, but we can also look at people just doing sitting to standing. Like in 30 seconds, how many times can you go from sitting to standing? And this is giving you an indication of lower leg strength.
Yes, which is important.
And of course, evaluating people's balance. I mean, you started off this podcast talking about this new study from the NIH, which is extremely concerning. And well, I think we should be testing for balance, which can be done so easily. You can have people just stand on one leg. You can have them do a tandem stance and see if they can maintain it. There's many ways to test it very quickly and efficiently. So I think this comes back to this treatment gap again, because let's say you go to a geriatric doctor. They'll be more attuned to this, but you know what? It's a small subspecialty. It can't possibly meet the number of people, older people that we see in society today. Orthopedic doctors are in treatment mode. So you go to them and they're so busy all day long doing so many curative things, but it's not yet in the mindset of these people. Cardiologists also. However, I do think this is shifting a bit. There's a new society, for example, called the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Actually, more physiatrists were involved in its initiation of this organization, and it's grown by leaps and bounds, and it's very dedicated to using lifestyle interventions to help people's health. So, and I think they're going to be increasingly prominent and important. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get this message out more and more.
I am too. And thank you for that. That is encouraging. And one thing that I like to do is, and I'd like your opinion for those listening in right now who might be saying, well, gee, I know that my own doctor, my own PCP does not do those things, but I can test myself. And if there is something that's concerning, I can then discuss that possibly with my PCP. You can measure your grip strength. If you don't have one of those hand grip strength measuring things, you can go to a PT office, physical therapy office, or even some gyms have them, number one. And you can measure your own waist, for example. And so you can walk and see if your balance is off. So I encourage everyone, knowing that there are limitations with the medical system currently, to really kind of look at yourself, check your own body when you can. And if there's something that is not right, that is off, then discuss that with your doctor. Do you agree with that, Dr. Rozanski?
Partly. I think that, for example, measuring hand grip strength, you could easily be doing it incorrectly. You have to take multiple measurements. And I'm not sure that that's one that would be widespread with individuals doing it on their own. But I'm a big fan of subjective measures, of which one of the easiest ones, the most important ones, is your subjective sense of feeling energetic.
Yeah.
Because that's your vitality. And when that is down, that's a vital sign. And that's a clue. Wait a second, my energy's down. Why is it down? Is it something physical? Is it what I'm eating? I'm not getting enough sleep. Is it a lot of stress? Maybe I'm feeling lonely. Maybe it could be many things. But what I say is that as you get older, your physical energy may decline. But, especially today, you can see people in their 80s and 90s being very productive and starting even new businesses in their 80s. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
You can't have the same physical energy at 90 when you were 20, but you can be every bit as energetic.
That's a great line right there. You've developed a list of areas that everyone should focus on to help them to age better. And you call them the 6 domains of optimal health and vitality. You just mentioned the word vitality and energy. So important. And you go into it's very holistic. You go into all aspects of our health, our emotional health and our physical health, our mental health, and also important. So let's start. I do want to review those domains with you now so my audience can benefit. So let's start with physical health. So after 60, right, women face we mentioned a lot, muscle loss, thinning bones, joint pain, other chronic things. And what are the most essential physical health practices that women should adopt? And how can resistance training specifically help combat these changes that are definitely happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say there are four pillars in terms of physical health. One of them is just being more active, being physically active, building your endurance. So it's great if you're walking. It's great if you're walking with a more speed and maybe for longer periods of time. But you know what? If you take somebody who's completely sedentary and you can get them to do, let's say, 10 minutes of a brisk walk per day, just 10 minutes a day, you will decrease their risk of mortality over the subsequent 10 years, about 20%, which will beat any drug that we have. So, I mean, that itself is just striking. And so I say that the place to start, if you're going to say, I got all these different things you can do, are you moving? Are you active? And I talk about lifestyle, physical health. So, in other words, it turns out, and this was monumental, in 2018, we had new physical activity guidelines published in the US. It's been published every 10 years. The first one was only published in 2008, so we're not that far into it. But it was strikingly different in 2018 because it changed the guidelines and it said based on new data, based on some accelerometer data and other data that you were able to look at, they realized and recognized that any amount of physical activity counts towards your health. Prior to that, we used to think that you needed bouts of at least 10 minutes of physical activity. Well, this is kind of earth-shaking data. It's profound, really, because it says, gee, every time I take the stairs instead of the escalators, I'm contributing my health. Well, every time I go to the store and I'm parking farther from the supermarket instead of getting close, probably saving time, decreasing stress, but I'm improving my physical health as well. If my post office isn't far away, maybe I can walk there. And just building these things into your daily life, you can kind of gamify it. You can make a game out of it and try to look for all these different opportunities to get physical activity during your day. And that's the baseline. So that's I think, number one. Then I'd say number two is resistance training. And I'll make a distinction here why I call it a separate area than exercise, because I think we combine them together. And what gets lost in that is that resistance training, practically speaking, is different because the number one concern when you're doing resistance training is avoiding injury. The second concern is avoiding injury. And the third is avoiding injury. That's the key there. And people need to know how to do things well. So I can throw out different things for people to do, but there's a decent chance that they might do some of these things wrong. And you don't want to. You want to work out all your different muscle groups. So you want to get some instruction on it. You can learn a lot from friends, individual people, people you talk to at the gym and so forth. But knowing how to do these things well is important. See, walking is natural. I can get somebody to walk who's sedentary and so forth. And also, again, it just hasn't been emphasized as much. But resistance training is going to it's your muscle care. It's going to take care of these muscles, which combined is the biggest organ of your body. If you combine them all together. And this is going to determine whether at age 80, 70, even, are you lifting the groceries? Are you getting up from your chair okay? Are you climbing stairs fine? Are you catching yourself as you might potentially trip? Opening jars? All of these things that we take for granted. So we tend to live in the present. That's human nature. It's not that we don't think about the future. It's just that I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow. And every day it's the same thing going on subconsciously in our head. And we just don't get to this as much as we should. That's, I think, what's going on. So I try to emphasize resistance training as a separate area that you need to work on.
Yeah, it's so important. And then,
Yeah. And then nutrition, obviously, and meeting your nutritional needs, eating healthily. And as you get older, making sure you're getting enough protein in your diet because your protein needs go up with aging. And then sleep. Sleep is important as well, very important.
yes, those are those are the pillars that you're talking about as part of the physical health aspect of your domains. Yes.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me, Dr. Rozanski, my first book came out in 2010, and I remember doing the research, and I had a passing reference to sleep. It was a passing, when I look back at it now, And then in my last book, of course, there's an entire chapter devoted to sleep, what it does, all the different aspects of sleep, all the different cycles of sleep, how important it is to your mental health, your physical health, and your ability to age better. We know so much more now than we did even 10 years ago, which is really incredible to me. But I take sleep very, very seriously. I wear an Apple Watch here too, and I wear an Oura ring. I'm a little bit overly, but it's all fun to me. Let's talk about your resistance snacks. These are micro moments of strength building that I guess you can do throughout the day. Someone who's like super busy saying, oh, no, I don't have time to go to a gym, or maybe chronic joint pain and are a little hesitant because of that. So what are these?
Sure. Well, this was an outgrowth in terms of my own thinking from the 2018 guidelines. And I said, we got to promulgate this idea that every type of physical activity counts. And I said, as long as we're going to do that, let's divide these up into activity snacks, exercise snacks, and resistance snacks. So activity snacks are the things I already just mentioned, which is like walking to the post office. An exercise snack might be intentionally walking up 3 flights of stairs.
Right.
Resistance snacks, see, we think in terms of resistance in terms of, well, I got to go to the gym. I've got to devote at least a half an hour to an hour of time. But a lot of people don't have that time.
No.
There's no reason you can't break that up into small snacks. And I would call this as kind of like a 2-for-1, because as we're going through our day very often today, so many people are living such intense lives and they're sitting down at the computer and then they're just trying to unwind a little bit or don't unwind. So a great way to unwind is to say, wait, now as I need to take a break from my work, I'll do some of my resistance exercises, which you can break up into upper body, core, and lower body and say, okay, here's my upper body things. I'll get 2 of those in this morning. And you can develop it as a ritual tied to something else you're doing and get a lot of your needed resistance training, in other words, the care for your muscles done that way.
Yep. A good example of that, and something I personally do, is like throughout the day, I'll just stop and do like a 1-minute plank. No matter, I'm not wearing gym clothes, I'm wearing regular street clothes. And so what? I'll just go down and do a plank, hold it for a minute, or do a couple of push-ups while I'm down there and things like that. And then that's it. I'm not going to do it for an hour. I'm doing it for 60 seconds. And then I can do it again, or sometimes 2 minutes. Or another favorite of mine, because also studies have shown, I'm sure you saw this too, they also, because it's isometric like a plank, is they help you with blood pressure, and that's a wall sit. So I'll do a wall sit and just do that for a minute or two. And it's a very calming thing as well, not just good for my muscles and bones, but it's mentally calming. It's very Zen-like. So thank you for that. I'm totally in favor of that. Big support. So let's move on to the mental vitality aspect, one of your mental vitality domain. So many women in their 60s. I mean, to me, midlife is defined by the word change. Well, life is really, but midlife really is. You've got a lot going on. You're going through menopause. You're out of menopause. Maybe your job situation is changing. Maybe you're retiring. Maybe you're retiring from your career and starting something new, as you mentioned before. Starting a new company. Kids are flying the coop. Maybe they're coming back. It's like parents, big issue for midlife women. Parents are aging, and you've got that situation that, of course, you want to be focused on to help with that, as I did with my own mother. So anyway, we have a lot going on mentally, and then forgetfulness, and then brain fog because of the drops in estrogen. So what's happening cognitively in this age, during this age, and how does this domain kind of help us address that, your mental vitality domain?
First of all, as I was listening to you, I said, gee, you hit every single issue that I think people face, and often multiple of these. And certainly, this is a very important question and issue, because people are feeling a bit overwhelmed, and you can feel little bit of brain fog and other things. And so I think you have to distinguish here between what might be normative and what might be concerning. So a lot of this is normative for age, and people start to worry about, gee, I can't remember people's names and things and so forth. And what you have to look out for, obviously, is when, things are accelerating, when other people are noticing changes and things like that. But for most people, these are normative changes that you can do a lot of things for that we just don't do. That helps with that. Part of this is stress management, but part of this is understanding that your brain, even though it's a collection of neurons, in a way functions like a muscle. It's not a muscle, clearly. It's a collection of neurons in the synapses and all of that, but you can treat it like a muscle. So first of all, what this kind of means is that my lifestyle factors really matter. In other words, getting enough sleep, for example, is an obvious example. Perhaps not appreciated as much as just how much exercise affects the brain. Profoundly.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast, a lot about how new studies showing how strength training specifically can help. I mean, really all exercise does, but there's direct connection.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah, no question. I mean, it's going to help with your ability to think, your processing speed, memory. These things all have been shown. Even one single session of exercise can sometimes increase your immediate processing afterwards. So, and certainly it is a very profound factor in decreasing the risk of dementia. So those are all things you can do. So that's one area. And I think people need to pay more attention to diet and how it affects them. And what I say there is pay attention. Just pay attention to how food affects you. I do believe that food affects different people in different ways, but pay attention to, how you feel after you've eaten something an hour or two later. I'll tell you an anecdote. I mean, it's just like, you think I would know like a lot of this stuff because I've been studying lifestyle medicine for many, many years. But I used to go into work very early and I'd have some cereal. I'd like healthier cereal, but I'd have one bowl of cereal and then I'd have a second bowl of cereal. And that's what I was having for breakfast. And I did not put the association together for quite a while that, hey, wait a second, about 2-3 hours later, I was kind of crashing.
Yeah.
And I said, wait, this is not the kind of good breakfast for me. And I cut it out and that whole thing disappeared. So for me personally, that kind of breakfast was not working.
Yes, I agree with you. I need to have some protein in the morning.
Yeah.
When that clearly, I don't know what cereal you were eating, but it was like more carbs than protein probably.
Yeah.
And then, for sure. I find that's true even of eating oatmeal. And everyone says, oh, oatmeal's so good for you, which it is.
Yeah.
But I find personally, when I've tried it, all right, I'm going to eat oatmeal in the morning. That didn't work for me. I got a little shaky. Maybe my blood glucose levels were kind of whacking out. And I said, that doesn't work for me. So now it's definitely a protein like some eggs or something else. So you're right. Your real message with that is that you have to listen to your body. What works for one person who is eating cereal and oatmeal may not work for you. So you need to kind of really see how you feel. Getting back to your whole idea of vitality and how do you feel?
Yeah.
Is it energizing you or sapping your energy, right?
That's exactly right. Use the vitality question as your North Pole, as your guide.
Yeah, definitely. And then you talk about learning to guide our thoughts. So what are 1 or 2 daily habits that can help midlife women sharpen their mental vitality? I mean, it sounds like maybe meditation, or what do you think about guiding our thoughts? Like kind of convincing ourselves, or you tell us.
Well, the fortunate thing is there's many answers to that question, which is great because we're all different sorts of people. So mindfulness for some people is extraordinarily powerful as a way of guiding your thoughts in an intentional way. I'd say also but there's so many things, like how do you start your day? So many of us wake up, me included, I've had to work on this. You wake up, you're getting ready, and you're immediately in doing mode for the day. I got to do this, I got to do that. And we go on automatic. And we go into this doing mode without hey, wait a second. Maybe I could stop for 5 minutes, enjoy the heat of the cup of coffee, and maybe think about a couple things to be grateful for. Yeah. So that's like, how's your startup of the day? Oh,
Right.
by the way, gratitude is a great mindset for working on guiding your thoughts. I said that's like the grandfather of all mind-directed thoughts. It's something that's available to all of us, and no one really has a resistance to the idea, but we don't generally practice it. So,
No, we don't. What a wonderful way, though, to start your day with some gratitude
yeah, yeah,
guided thinking
yeah,
and end your day, right? Bookend your day
yeah.
with these thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm sure, and that's something I don't do enough of. And I'm, thanks to you now, kind of telling us we should, I will do that.
Well, and the thing about that is that we sell some of these things as easy to do, but it's not so easy to do. I personally have worked on gratitude for a long time. I'd say I'm kind of average. I need to be better than I am, and I admit it because I tend to be one of these doing persons, but I have to work on it. But I do work on it, and I think it does make a difference. But there's other things you can do. We have like these. You're familiar with the concept of flow. Flow is like when you're doing something that you're really absorbed by, and there's no distractions. Time stops, and you feel like you could do it forever.
Yeah.
Some people might find that in ballet dancing, playing music, writing, many different things. So you can use that as a tool. In other words, you're doing, let's say, a lot of cognitive accounting work and you're getting burnt out. So we'll say, wait a second, what's a flow type of activity that I will stop at, let's say, 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and I'm going to give myself 15 minutes of that. And that's a way to, one of the interesting things is that the brain loves cognitive variety. We daydream a lot. We don't pay enough attention to this open awareness that we can have. Let me just take in what's in my environment. But the brain thrives on different parts of variety, probably because we're using different parts of our brain and other parts are getting rest and things like that. So again, walking, getting out, if you're close to a place that's kind of nice, or where you can take a 5-10 minute walk in nature, that would be
Yeah.
a good thing to do. So
Yep.
there's so many ways you can do that, but you need to have breaks during your day. We treat your brain as a muscle. What happens is that we get so involved in our concentration and we start to lose power, but we don't notice that we're losing power. We just keep going and we just accept that we're losing steam. So you have to often be intentional about this because you might be in a work environment which doesn't encourage you to do that. So you have to be a self-starter in some of these things. But all these things can add up, and you guide your thoughts and you can guide your mental vitality.
Yeah. Intentional. I like that. Intentional. And I think we all could be more intentional with all of these things. I mean, whether it's doing a resistance snack or doing some of these guided mental exercises as well. And we have to be more disciplined about it and committed to doing them, right?
Yes, except if we start to make this as a menu where you have to do all the things, then that can be problematic because really I think what you want to do is one thing and make one thing yours and then build from there. So I don't
No,
want
you're so right about that. You're so right. Yeah, the way that was said just now sounded a little overwhelming. I totally agree with you. And we don't want that because then you'll put the blanket over your head, won't do anything. We know that
Right.
that's happened to all of us, of course, at some point. No, you're right. And very often I started running at 50, and I called that my foundational habit where like only did that. I didn't focus on the eating. You know what I mean? I focused on that. And then from there, other healthy habits started. I started to focus more on my eating. And then I was sleeping better because I was moving more and so on and so forth. And then I was focused more on that. So you're right. It's like, take it slow, but start somewhere. Like take that first step, I think is the big message here, right?
Exactly. That is the message.
Yeah. So let's go back to what some other things that people in their 60s, 50s, 60s, in midlife are experiencing. We mentioned a few before. They're retiring, downsizing, feeling invisible. This is a word very often used by women in midlife, that they feel invisible, like maybe they are not as relevant, perhaps. And this is true of men as well, not just women. But how do you define purposeful living? See, to me, having a purpose-driven life is crucial. It's very, very important. It's very important to me. And I think it's really something that everybody should be more aware of having for themselves as well. And so why is it such a powerful antidote to the emotional challenges that do come with this, getting back to the age jump, or really for anybody in midlife?
Yeah, well, great question. So just to be clear on our terms, I think we could find purposeful living as you are waking up in the morning with things to do,
Yeah.
and you're excited to do them. So you wake up with a sense of purpose. But why is it so important? Because it is what we could say is the equivalent of a basic biological need in the psychological domain. It is our most profound basic psychological need. People wither when they don't have a sense of purpose over a long period of time. But when you have a sense of purpose and you're pursuing it, that's what gives you vitality, energy, that sense of feeling alive. That's the equalizer as you're getting older. We're losing physical energy. But when I said earlier that you can be every bit as energetic when you're 80 or 90 as when you're 20, it's the caveat with that is if you're living with a strong sense of purpose, it'll help you through all the adversities you have, because people who are living with a sense of purpose and are used to that as a mindset are people who are more likely to seek solutions to problems when they occur and to frame challenges as opportunities to grow or opportunities to overcome. So if you're dealing with any of these losses that you just mentioned, as you get older, we lose friends, right? We lose some of our health, right? So
Yeah.
finding purpose in the adversity and overcoming it gives you a sense of, I've overcome, I'm optimistic, I'm strong, I have a sense of self-esteem. So it does all of that sort of stuff. And by the way, it's particularly pertinent to the whole issue of retirement.
Yeah.
Retirement today is interesting because we are living longer. And I can recall when I first started out in cardiology, this was decades ago, there was one of my fellows came and said, you got to see this, you got to see this. So I followed him into the stress room, and there was a man about 74 years old who was really doing quite well on a treadmill. And he was saying, wow, look at that man, he's 74, and look what he's doing. And look how our frame of reference has changed.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what? Yeah, so.
But it has changed.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So we can live longer, and we are living longer, but people do want to live well. But
Yeah.
they want to live with a sense of purpose. And so what happens if you have the mindset, gee, at 65, I'll reach retirement, but you don't have interests at that point, then retirement, the first year can be great. You're on the golf course, you're going to the beach, but you know what? At a certain point, you say, well, what else is there? What else is there? That isn't what gives you vitality. Vitality is, wait, I got other things to do here. And you see that, like, people who, even athletes, they retire, they have to move on to other things to do. I say you can retire, but you can never retire your need for purpose. You can never retire that. You always have to be having things to do till the last days. That's the elixir of life.
Yeah. And the good news is there really is so much to do in this world. I mean, we're surrounded. I myself think I don't have enough hours in the day. I'm sure you feel the same way. There are not enough hours in the day to do all the things that I want to get done. I want to do. I want to have fun. I want to do this. I want to do that. So that's good news for me that I do have a daily sense of purpose. And I really encourage everyone listening in. If you don't feel that right now, really think through what brings you joy. Look, what else, Dr. Rozanski? What would you say to someone who's like, I just don't know what my purpose is? Is there any like starter thing that you could offer to help them?
I do think in the age group you're talking about, that isn't an uncommon problem, that you've been full bore in a professional career or a job for decades, or sometimes that same job just doesn't mean the same to you, but you feel like you're on a rope now and you don't know what else to do. And I think that's a common problem. So where do you start? First of all, I think you start by acknowledging that that's so. We often run away from our feelings and our thoughts and so forth. We don't want to face thoughts like that. They're difficult. And if you don't know what to do, they're more difficult to face. So there's so many distractions, you can run away from it. So the first mistake would be to run away from that. Rather, embrace that. Then secondly, I'd say, well, you don't have to have a sense of mission to start doing purposeful things. You can start to be doing purposeful things. And as you're doing, you grow and other things begin to occur. But I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting is that if you remember this famous book by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Sure. Yes.
So it talks about these 7 habits, and one of them is having the end in mind. And he tells you this very powerful exercise. Imagine you're at your own funeral and you've invited someone from your family, someone from work, one of your best friends to come to the funeral, and you try to figure out what you want them to say about you. And when people do that work, it's not about the creative things I did in my job. It's I was a good husband, a good father, a good son. It's about, oh, I cared about my community, or I
Yes.
did this for humanity. So wait a second. That's really what we want to do. And very often we've neglected those aspects of our lives. Well, you know what? You can do that at any age. You can always start to volunteer. And the data is very profound. It shows that people in older age, that's what been primarily studied, who volunteer, they do live longer, they live more healthy. So that concept of giving is something that's always available to you.
Yes.
So different places to start, but that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I always encourage people to do that. And there are so many studies that back up exactly what you just said about showing how people's own levels of happiness it increases when they're giving to others, or if they give a gift to another person as opposed to receiving a gift, for example. And it's remarkable. So thank you for those tips. So I'd like to move on to loneliness, because I think that's very connected to what we were just talking about, because very often if you may have had your work friends and then you're leaving work, you're retiring, you no longer have easy access to those work friends, and the kids are moving out. I mean, your whole life could be changing. Maybe you move away to a new community. Who knows what's happening? But loneliness, people, of course, at this age are passing away, maybe in your circle. So the point is, loneliness, we know this to be true, Dr. Rozanski, right? Loneliness is at a crisis level in this country, really in the world, but in this country. And so that is something I'm so happy that you're focusing on. And it's a public health crisis. And we know that our past government was talking about how important this is and how we have to focus on it. So what can we do? What do you suggest people do to combat this crisis of loneliness?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's an analogy here to physical health. If you start off early in life exercising, you're building a reservoir in terms of muscle strength and so forth, bone density, so that you're less likely to outlive your bones and so forth as you get older. It's interesting with the social aspects here. This has been studied now for over 50 years. There was a famous study, it was called the Alameda County study. It was done in the 1970s, and they just looked at the size of people's network, both in men and women. And they found that the more friends you had, the longer you lived, or the more people in your social network. It could have been also belonging to a church group or, any number of things. And then the data followed a few years later about the importance of the quality of your relationships. And everything we've looked at ever since then has shown that our need for social connections is one of the most profound health factors there is. And loneliness is definitely a risk factor for diminished longevity and so forth. And I think the reason why this is so is that when we are lonely or we don't have good social ties, there are actual pathophysiological changes that occur, like more inflammation, poor immune function, and so forth. But also, we are lacking in, it has secondary emotional effects in terms of depression, anxiety, loss of confidence. And then the eating habits and the overall physical activity habits go down in all these areas of these domains in terms of, loneliness, lack of purpose, depression, anxiety. In all of these states, there's a truism that health behaviors diminish, and that has a profound effect on health. So what can you do? The first thing here is that the preventative thing that doesn't occur is that although we have this basic psychological need also to be connected to people, that is one need we can keep putting off when we're in our mid-ages, like we're in our 40s and 50s. And in today's world, it's kind of subtle because I can be in touch with you by texting, by Zoom, and other things. But you know what? There's things about relationships with true friends which require time to know you better, time to share things, to make myself vulnerable. So I think that's what's feeding part of this loneliness is that we subverted or sublimated this need to be connected to people because we are using more superficial means. And then all of a sudden I'm retired or, I'm slowing down or I just want to be more connected to people. And gee, I wish I had more friends and so forth. So one thing is to think about that earlier, to put in the time to maintain friendships. But even if that's so, you can still always start to make connections. I think that one of the things to do here is it's almost making yourself vulnerable. It's like finding a friend and saying, I'm feeling lonely. We don't open up to, we're living behind these social masks. And I think many lonely people don't know that other people are lonely. And I think if we can start to share some of this with people warranted that we know somewhat, we can start to develop deeper relationships. I think that's one thing. Joining community groups or organizations, things like that. There's a lot of stuff out there now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'd like to actually interrupt you and do a little plug for something. The Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, I've been connected to them for about 10 years. And now I'm special advisor, oversee our marathon teams, and started something called the Be Bone Strong walking clubs to check a few boxes. One of them is walking is a great exercise, of course. It is weight bearing, so it's helpful for muscles and bones. So that was check. And then, but also it was to combat loneliness. And it's specifically geared to people in midlife and beyond. And it's very micro, meaning it's not like a citywide thing. You don't have to like drive to get to the start of the walk. It's in your neighborhood. And it's like maybe a block away where everyone is meeting. Very, very micro. Like that's the concept. And so I started one in Virginia, and then we're going to be rolling them out across the country. And the whole point really is to combat this loneliness. And so people, not surprisingly, but so beautiful that they're getting to know their neighbors, people that they've lived near for sometimes 20 years, 10 years, and they didn't really know. And they're getting to know them. And they're like, dinners are being had. And there's like this connection that's being created. So I'm seeing it in real time, how something as simple as, hey, everyone, every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, fill in the blank of what day and what time, we're going to meet and walk for an hour. No matter what your abilities are or paces, that you'll never be left alone. There'll be somebody, blah, blah, blah. It's remarkable. That's just one example of this kind of community building that I think could be so, so helpful. And my own hope is that we can create these in neighborhoods and then get the government level involved as so in partnership with them to really get the word out and really encourage people. Because there's a lot of lonely people out there, but there's a lot of people out there who can also walk.
Yes.
Walk and talk.
You got it. You are spot on. And I wish you the best of luck in all of this. I think it's so important. So
thank you. Yeah. And anyone listening, I know I've talked about it before, but if you have any interest and you want information about it, just get a hold of me on social media or agebetterpodcast@gmail.com. So just getting back to that. Yeah. So anyway, what you were saying and what I clearly agree with is just be a little bold, everyone. Be bold. if you're shy or an introvert, just put yourself out there by maybe getting involved in a club like this, or if you don't want to walk, a knitting club, whatever your interest is, join a club where there are other like-minded people, I think is the real message here, right? Whatever it is that you like to do, find others who like to do it too, including volunteering. So we're going to go into emotional mastery. Is such an empowering phrase. That's what you call it. And many women at this stage are navigating grief, divorce, caregiving, everything that we've been talking about. So how do you build emotional mastery during what could be the most turbulent time of their lives?
Well, it's a huge subject. Could take a whole podcast on its own. But in short, some of the things we've talked about are essential. Building a strong sense of purpose has an emotional component to that. You feel more confident, optimistic, and you're able to handle adversity better when things challenge you emotionally. And the same is what we just described in terms of friendships and confidants and things like that. So relying on that, thinking about a network where you develop at least one or two people who can be mentors or can be people you can share things with, that's very helpful. But having said that, I think that when you look at emotions and the concept of emotional mastery, it's the idea that, hey, can I work with my emotions so that I'm controlling them rather than they're controlling me? And really, there's a number of aspects of this, which is, can you generate more positive emotions? Can you shorten the duration of negative emotions when they're warranted? Can you understand that your emotions are information, they're friends, they're telling you things about yourself? And then finally, there's something that we would call affect tolerance, the ability to handle negative emotions and tolerate them and hold them and not run away from them, because you actually get better at doing that if you actually do that. Don't run away from emotions. And again, that can be very appropriate at this age. If you've lost a good friend, if you've lost maybe a job or even a health issue you're dealing with and so forth. So with the positive emotions, again, I think gratitude, for example, is a good place to start. You can work on appreciation, more joy, things like that. We've talked about that. In terms of the reading your emotions, we don't emphasize this enough, is information. It's often telling us how we're feeling when we haven't even worked it out in our head. We may be telling us, wait, there's something off in this situation, something I'm feeling anxious about. Why am I feeling anxious? So what happens very often is we have an emotional sense of like feeling off, but we don't go into it. We don't say, why am I feeling this way? And what is that really? Well, it might be, for example, that you got a demotion in your job or you lost a job or something like that. And maybe what you're really feeling is a sense of grief over what has happened, and you need to mourn that. But if you haven't even identified the emotion, you're not really working with it. So that's something that I think people can get better at if they just have the mindset, hey, wait, my emotions are things that give me information and tell me things. But then finally, just being able to shut off negative emotions, which aren't serving you well anymore. And these are just tools and techniques people develop. Taking a walk, finding a good friend that you can talk to when you're feeling down. Sometimes nothing wrong with a little entertainment to get you off your thing. Sometimes just stop where you are. Well, let's say you're feeling stressed in your job and say, you know what, I need this 10-minute break and I'm going to take a brisk walk around the block and come back. That's called clearing your head. Right? It's an expression.
Yep.
Well, it can serve that, and it can help deal with your emotions too.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's really wonderful. Such important tools and tips you just gave. Thank you for that. So finally, we're getting to stress. And you said, and I quote, stress isn't something to eliminate, it's something to work with. So what does healthy stress management look like for you?
So I think we've done the public a disservice here, because we've appropriately pointed out that stress can be hazardous to your health. Some stress can be hazardous to your health, but a lot of stress actually does the opposite. It builds you. It's what gives you confidence. See, if I take the word stress and I just change it to challenge, it's a whole different connotation, right? But any time people are, even if you think about when you really grew in life, or when you felt really proud, it was usually something that was stressful that you overcame or dealt with. So stress is bad when, or we call toxic stress, when it's overwhelming, when you don't feel you have control over it, when it does, when it has a lot of emotional toxicity to it, or when what's meaningless stress, which is the awful kinds of stress, like you're subjected to trauma or abuse that was needless. That's an awful thing to deal with. So that's very negative stress. But a lot of stress is very good. And if you look at the data, it shows that there's actually a U-shaped relationship between stress and well-being. We're at our best when we have some stress in our lives. Toxic stress is bad, but also being bored is bad. People do better when they have challenges, when they have things of meaning, but that comes with stress. As the saying goes, if you want to grow, you can't be comfortable. If you're committed to being comfortable, you can't grow. That's a truism of life. So we have to become good at stress management, but it's not bad. It's good. It's good to work with it and grow from it.
Thank you for that. Well, this was incredible. I really believe this was a master class, Dr. Rozanski, in how to age better. I mean, you covered everything that's really, really important. You gave us tools and tips that I think we can all use to age better, to apply to ourselves, from the physical to the emotional to the mental. And thank you for that. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing out there, what you're writing and researching and speaking about. And before we completely wind down, we just covered so much, but would you like to share your top 3 takeaways that you really want to make sure the Age Better audience remembers from this conversation today?
Okay. Well, I would say number 1 is the power of the first step. In other words, we have covered a lot of things, and there are these 6 domains of health, from the physical to the emotional to the mental vitality, the sense of purpose, social, and how you handle stress. Each of those are entree points for improving your sense of vitality and feeling more energetic. You just start with one, and we underestimate the power of one step. So if you can say one thing I'm going to do and own it and work with it, you're on your way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think you made that point when you talked about you took up running at age 15, made that your baseline. I believe that you got to make movement your baseline. You got to be moving. You got to be physically moving. Have a lifestyle where you're physically active, and I'd say build into resistance training into that as well. So I think, emphasize that today. And the third thing, and I think perhaps the most ignored, but the most crucial, and even trumping exercise, is to live with a strong sense of purpose. Because when you live with a strong sense of purpose, it generates more vitality in all these other domains. So we just don't accept that I've got a job, but say, hey, where do I want to go? Think about the future. Think about building multiple sources of purpose. It will serve you really well as you age.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rozanski, for joining me today. And I really hope that you'll consider coming back again so we can continue this conversation.
It would be my pleasure. It'd be my delight to do so.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Age Better Podcast, please do a few things. First, share it with all your friends and family. Then, subscribe to Age Better wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you never miss a single episode. Finally, if you have ideas for topics you want me to cover in a future episode of Age Better, send an email to agebetterpodcast@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media. Until next time, remember this: we can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Talk to you soon. Age Better Podcast is a proud member of the Sound Advice Network. Sound Advice, women's voices amplified.